Welcome to the book of Genesis. Robert M. Price, your guide through the text. Can't claim exactly to be the author of it. I'm not that old. But then again, the whole book of Genesis is probably a lot less old than most of us thought. I've been reading the Old Testament minimalists lately. Giovanni Garbini, Philip Davies, Thomas Thompson, Mark C. Bredler, and others, and it is fascinating. It turns out pretty much no ancient Israel, except for the brief period before the Assyrians and Babylonians gobbled up what there was of those countries, and King David is like King Arthur, and forget it. But the stories themselves may be pretty old, even though they were probably put together in the Hellenistic or Persian periods. And I guess some of that should have been pretty obvious, since the story of Korah and Moses presupposes the Levitical choristers, the Korahites that stem from the Second Temple period, and I guess there were a few little hints like that we should have noticed earlier. Anyway, wanted to get to where we left off, on the eve of a fascinating encounter, perhaps a divine encounter, perhaps not, depending on how you read it, between Jacob and whoever the mystery guest is. This would be in Genesis 32, and this time I am using yet another translation, that of Richard Elliott Friedman. He wrote the book Who Wrote the Bible, which is a good, spirited modern defense of the JED&P theory. Once I went into a synagogue with a friend of mine, saw the 5 Torah scrolls up there, and jokingly asked him, well, I see JED&P, but what's the 5th one? Anyway, this book is the Bible with Sources Revealed, a new view into the 5 books of Moses. A book I bet you'll want to get a hold of, because I don't think there are other in-print books that distinguish the sources and even the redactors in Genesis. This was published by Harper, San Francisco. I remember the good old days. Show you how old I am, when it used to be Harper and Row. Wonder if they're going to move the thing yet again, and we'll wind up with Harper Des Moines or something like that. Anyway, this was published in 2003. I'm sure it's still around, and a mighty interesting book, color-coded like the Jesus Seminar books, though here just according to source, not according to reliability, etc. You can imagine what would be the case if you had it coded according to historical authenticity, right? You could save yourself a lot of color and ink. Everything would be black anyway. When we last saw Jacob, God had given him the tap on the shoulder to go back to his ancestral homeland and to leave Syria, and his shifty Uncle Laban, who I can't help thinking of as a little bit like Uncle Leo on Seinfeld, and so he gets word that Esau, after all these years, is coming with a crowd to meet him. And he says, oh boy, last time I heard anything about this guy, he was swearing to kill me. Now he's probably going to make a battle of it. And so Jacob comes up with this theory, this plan to divide his huge company of retainers and slaves and workers and bodyguards and herders and cattle into 2 groups to do an end run. Hopefully Esau's felons will only fall upon one of them. In fact, let's just look at that in Genesis 32:4, a piece of J material. And Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the territory of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, you shall say this to my lord, to Esau, your servant Jacob, said this, I've stayed with Laban and delayed until now, and ox and ass and sheep and male and female servant have become mine, and I'm sending to tell my lord, so as to find favor in your eyes. And the messengers came back to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother, to Esau, and also he's coming to you, and 400 men with him. And Jacob was very afraid, and he had anguish. And he divided the people who were with him, and the sheep and the oxen and the camels into 2 camps. And he said, if Esau will come to one camp and strike it, then the camp that is left will survive. And Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Yahweh, who said to me, go back to your land and to your birthplace, and I'll deal well with you. I'm not worthy of all the kindnesses and all the faithfulness that you've done with your servant, because I crossed this Jordan with just my rod, and now I've become 2 camps. Save me from my brother's hand, from Esau's hand, because I fear him, in case he'll come and strike me, mother with children. And you've said, I'll do well with you, and I'll make your seed like the sand of the sea, that it won't be countable because of its great number. And then the redactor who put J and E together added, and he spent that night there. Then we have an E passage. And he took an offering for Esau, his brother, from what had come into his hand, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 nursing camels and their offspring, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 he-asses. And he placed them in his servant's hands, each herd by itself, and he said to his servants, pass on in front of me and keep a distance between each herd and the next. And he commanded the first, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going, and to whom do these in front of you belong, then you'll say to your servant, to Jacob, it's an offering sent to my lord, to Esau, and he is behind us as well. You notice this kind of presupposes that Jacob hasn't sent a message to Esau. Well, he hasn't in E. He only did in J. Right? One of those loose ends. Verse 20, still in E. And he also commanded the second, also the third, also all of those who were going behind the herd, saying, you'll speak this way to Esau when you find him, and you'll say, here is your servant Jacob behind us as well. Because he said, let me appease his face with the offering that's going in front of me, and after that I'll see his face. Maybe he'll raise my face. In other words, make me smile, and cause my countenance to lift. And the offering passed ahead of him, and he had spent that night in the camp. And he got up in that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 maids, the 4 wives in effect, and his 11 boys, and crossed the Jabbok ford. And he took them and had them cross the Wadi. That's the kind of river it is, not much of a biggie. He had everything that was his cross. And Jacob was left by himself, and a man, I would translate someone, wrestled with him until the dawn's rising. And he saw that he was not able against him. This presumably is the man who jumps him, not Jacob, who saw that he was not able against him. And he, the assailant, touched the inside of Jacob's thigh. And the inside of Jacob's thigh was dislocated during his wrestling with him. And he, the assailant, said, let me go, for the dawn has risen. And he said, I won't let you go unless you bless me. He said, well, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name won't be said Jacob anymore, but Israel, because you've struggled with God and with people and were able. Get it, Israel, the one who strives with strives with God. And Jacob asked, and he said, tell your name. He said, why is this that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the place's name Peniel, because I've seen God face to face and my life has been delivered. Peniel means face of God, implying, presence of God. If you want to get your fortune told or whatever, here's the place to come, near God. And he or his priest will tell you what you need to know. Anyway, verse 32, and the sun rose on him as he passed Penuel. It's a variant of Peniel, face of God. And he was faltering on his thigh. On account of this, the children of Israel to this day will not eat the tendon of the vein that is on the inside of the thigh, because he touched the inside of Jacob's thigh, the tendon of the vein. All right, we're still in E. Now, what is this endlessly fascinating story about? Well, let's get a few items off the table first, before we get to the big ticket one. This is doubly an etymological myth. It's trying to explain Peniel and Penuel, apparently variant pronunciations, the same name for the same place. Face of God, presence of God. Sort of the same ideas when old Cain is being driven away from the margins of Eden where his parents still lived. He says, "You've driven me out from before your face." This is a place, a holy place, where you're known to live. Well, there are various places where different gods were supposed to be holed up, and this is one of them. It also is a ceremonial story because it's trying to explain, a dietary law. I mean, that's absolutely clear, right? They just tell you that to commemorate this, they don't eat the thigh muscle, or however you want to translate. I think the RSV has the muscle in the hollow of the thigh because of this. Now, is that really why they didn't do it? Well, it could be, but it also could be that somebody just heard this story where the dislocation, the fighting dirty, has its own narrative motivation and said, hey, maybe that would explain this custom, this dietary custom that involves not eating the analogous muscle in animals. Who knows? It's kind of an axiom of history of religions research that the act is older than the word, the ritual is older than the myth that ostensibly explains it. And one way you can tell that is, whether in the Bible or outside of it, there are plenty of cases where the same thing continues to be done with a new rationale. That is very explicit in Exodus, for example, where Moses tells the Pharaoh, we've got to go out into the Sinai to keep the Feast of Firstlings. Well, that's what became the Passover. They were already doing it. They just lent it a new significance from an economic. The same thing with the concurring Feast of Unleavened Bread, first fruits of the ground. What had been agricultural feasts now became historical markers. So that's the Bible itself even admits that happens. It should be no surprise to anyone, no scandal or anything. Is this really the original reason they did this? Who knows? Can't be sure. But that's not all that it's trying to explain. The fact that Jacob limps, who cares, right? I mean, why bother mentioning that? Well, they had a reason. Because at Penuel, or Peniel, take your pick, they would do a particular ritual dance in a local festival. And again, E is collecting all these materials, and before they should vanish as times change. And this is the same sort of thing that you might remember Elijah was witnessing at Mount Carmel in, 1 Kings 17, 18, somewhere in there, where the prophets of Baal are calling upon him to ignite the sacrifice with a lightning bolt, and he won't do it. And so it says they limped about the altar all morning. What, are they all lame or crippled or something? No, it's just a kind of a dance where you jump back and forth as you go around the central object from one foot to the other. And if you're my age, you remember seeing it in Western TV shows and movies where the Indians were doing these limping dances, right? You remember what I'm talking about. Hey, everybody, let's do the limp. Well, they did. It was an old thing. It's an obvious thing, and that's what they were doing here. And so they're hanging it on Jacob. Why do they do this dance at this place? Well, who knows? But they said, this would explain it. And why would they do that? Why would they bother re-explaining a thing? Well, to draw it into the orbit of emerging monotheistic Judaism and to give it a kind of a new legitimation and a new theological framework. That's why if we can tag it on to the patriarch Jacob, no matter what totem or demon it was done in honor of before, we can legitimate it now. Like making December 25th, Brumalia, the rebirth celebration of the sun god Mithras, into Christmas. People aren't going to stop observing it, so let's just baptize it. The famous story where there's this Protestant who's just moved into an all-Catholic neighborhood, and every Friday when the devout Catholics are having fish, they're driven mad by this guy grilling steaks in the backyard, and the smell comes wafting through the neighborhood, and they say, "Oh, darn, she would like some of that steak, but can't, what do we do?" And they hold a neighborhood meeting without the Protestant, and they say, "How are we going to deal with this? It's driving us crazy." And they say, "Well, suppose we get the guy to convert to Catholicism. Then he won't be bothering us with the smell of meat cooking up deliciously on Friday." Hey, all right, so they go to him and say, "Earl, it's great being a Catholic, and here's why." And they give him the sell job, and he says, "Well, that does sound pretty good. I think I'll convert." So he goes through the ritual, and they bring him up in front of the bishop who's visiting, and he anoints him with holy water and says, "My son, you're a Catholic, not a Protestant. A Catholic, not a Protestant. A Catholic, not a Protestant. Amen." Well, I figure they got this one squared away, but what do you know, when Friday comes around again, there's the smell of that steak. And they say, "What the heck is this?" What, they not explain this to them? So they'll go over there in a crowd, and they see him sprinkling A1 sauce on the steak, saying, "You're a fish, not a steak. You're a fish, not a steak." I tell you, sometimes that's what you do, I guess. Baptize it fictively. So now what was forbidden is permitted. I tell you, don't say religious folks are stupid. It takes a lot of imagination to come up with gimmicks like that. That's one thing that's dull about being an atheist or a secularist. You just don't have to learn to wriggle like that. No agility required there. Anyway, there are Muslims who hundreds of years ago came up with ways of interpreting the Quran and the Hadith so that it's okay to drink wine. Not exactly taking it literally. Okay. There's one of the two ritual significances or ceremonial significances of that story. But the big thing, of course, that is very interesting here is the question of exactly who. Well, I'm sorry, one thing that's so obvious, I was about to leave it out. Jacob gets the name Israel. I mentioned last time that there's another story in the same context where he gets renamed too. You have different versions, doublets of things. But this is a pretty dramatic one. Who is this entity that leaps out at him and fights him? Apparently for some time, and from the middle of the night on to the dawn, and they're evenly matched. Now, what does that imply? It says a man. I don't think you can really push that necessarily beyond saying, like Daniel 7 does, one like a son of man, an entity in a human form, and we're going to have to, and it's purposely ambiguous, because later we're going to find out who it is. So, who is it? From what he says to the guy when he renames Jacob Israel, the striver with God, and from what Jacob says afterward, naming the joint Peniel, I've seen the face of God and lived to tell it. Certainly, he's supposed to be wrestling God or a God. Yet a God who cannot be seen. Right? And he says, "I got to get out of here. The light's coming up." It sounds like Dracula. Right? So is this a local spirit or demon or troll or is it God Almighty? Like when Yahweh jumps out to try to kill Moses when he's on his way back to Egypt in Exodus 4. Well, that story's probably a rewrite of this one. So, who is this? It just seems a little odd that Jake could hold his own with God Almighty in a wrestling match. For that reason, Gunkel suggested that this is a fragment of tradition in which Jacob was himself pictured as being some kind of a giant or a demigod. I guess it could be, but I think there's another interesting possibility here. Remember, he won't tell him his name, and even Yahweh does that when he's asked. He doesn't want to be seen. He's got a reason for fighting him, doesn't say what it is, and then he does get out of there. And Jacob says, I've seen the face of God and lived. Well, I think that all leads to this reunion scene we see next. 33:1, still in E material. And Jacob raised his eyes and looked, and here was Esau coming, and 400 men with him. And he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. And he placed the maids and their children first, and Leah and her children following, and Rachel and Joseph following. And he passed in front of them, and he bowed to the ground 7 times until he came up to his brother. And Esau ran to him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And they wept. And he raised his eyes and saw the women and the children, and he said, Who are these whom you have? And he said, The children with whom God has graced your servant. And the maids came over, they and their children, and bowed. And Leah and her children too came over, and they bowed. And then Joseph and Rachel came over, and they bowed. He said, Who is all this camp of yours that I met? And he said, To find favor in my Lord's eyes. And Esau said, I have a great deal, in other words, it's a gift for you, to curry your favor, put it bluntly. I have a great deal, my brother. Let what's yours be yours. And Jacob said, Don't. If I found favor in your eyes, then you'll take my offering from my hand, because on account of this I've seen your face, like seeing God's face, and you've accepted me. Take my blessing that's been brought to you, because God has been gracious to me, and because I have everything. And he pressed him, and he took it. And he said, Let's travel, and let's go, and let me go alongside you. And he said to him, Jacob to Esau, My Lord knows that the children are weak, and the nursing sheep and oxen are with me, and they'll drive them one day, and all the sheep will die. Let my Lord pass on in front of his servant, and let me move along at my pace required by the task that's before me and required by the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir. And Esau said, Let me set with you some of the people who are with me. And he said, bodyguards apparently. And he said, Why have I found favor in my Lord's eyes? And Esau went back on his way to Seir that day, and Jacob traveled to Sukkot. And he built a house for himself and made booths for his cattle. On account of this, he called the place's name Sukkot, which means booths. Just like the great holiday in Judaism, Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And Jacob came safe to the city of Shechem. And then the Genesis redactor adds a note, which was in the land of Canaan, when he was coming from Paddan Aram. Then back to E, and camped in front of the city, and he bought the section of field in which he pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, father of Shechem, for 100 kesita. And he set up an altar there and called it El, God of Israel. Let's see. Why all this back and forth between the two brothers? I could be wrong, but I tend to think that he doesn't want to travel with him because he's still afraid of an ambush. And notice he does not go to seek his brother out in Seir. He goes to Shechem instead. Still doesn't trust him. Well, now, the big question, what is the clue here about the identity of the person that Jacob wrestled by night and who renamed him Israel? Well, it is when Jacob says to his brother, Gee, it's great to see you. It's like seeing the face of God. Well, I think what we're supposed to understand here is that it was Esau who had by himself snuck through the lines and managed to, outdoorsman that he is, right, familiar with the countryside, he managed to sneak past all of the advancing party to find Jacob by himself, and he knew he was going to make peace the next day. That's why he had come, but damned if he wasn't going to take out of Jacob's hide what he owed. Okay, he's not going to kill him anymore. He's cooled down over the years, but he's gonna square things. So he's going to give Jacob a good beating before he forgives him. And he's surprised at Jacob's strength after all these years. I mean, he's grown up, he's done all this agricultural labor, so naturally he's stronger. He would like to stay and finish the fight, but he doesn't want to be recognized. He says, I'm not telling you my name, that I got to get out of here before the sun rises. He doesn't want Jacob to know when he sees him the next day that it was he who decided to square things by beating him up. Though, of course, it turned out not to be such a beat up as he thought it was going to be. But Jacob is no fool, and he does recognize him. He doesn't say anything until the next day when he's kind of winking at him. Struggled with God, eh? Well, seeing you is just like seeing God, because you're the one I struggled with. Okay, let's bury the hatchet. And he's made a good showing for himself. His brother had to fight dirty and dislocate his thigh to get away. Well, it kind of vindicates old Jake. Fascinating story. I find it that interpretation darn near irresistible. I would like to give credit to the scholar who wrote an article about that in Bible Review some years ago, but I can't remember, and I had come up with the same idea a year or two before I read it, so probably a bunch of you have too, without hearing of him or me. Well, now we come up with a kind of an R-rated soap opera in the next chapter that is, in a sense, not all that germane to the advancing narrative logic, but it is a heck of a tale. Once we get to Joseph, that's going to blow all of these little stories out of the water. It is a massive tale for the Bible, but we don't want to get into that quite yet. Let's take a look at the rape of Dinah. This is a pretty exciting tale in its own right. So Dinah is the only girl in the batch, right? Old Jake has his 2 wives and his 2 maids or concubines having kids. Rachel has only one. She's his favorite wife anyway, and that son is Joseph. Of course, there's going to be a second one, Benjamin, but we don't see him yet. And so Joseph is his favorite. Of course, we know what a bad idea that is, having favorites, and I think that's one thing the Bible writers are telling us. It's easy to do, but it'd be better not to. And but there's these 11 boys and 1 girl. Now, presumably, she's not going to be in this enumeration of the tribal patriarchs unless she is the one tribal matriarch. Was there a matriarchal tribe in the Amphictyony of the Israelites? Well, I'm guessing there was, though it probably didn't last. I'm not the only one who thinks so. I don't mean to take credit for the theory, but that's kind of the only reason she would even be in here at all. Because remember, all of these patriarchs, the sons of Jacob, were simply genealogical chart links. There were never people that really existed. They're just personifications of these tribes as they existed in the storyteller's day. So, 34:1, we're back to J. And Dinah, Leah's daughter, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the chieftain of the land, saw her, and he took her and lay with her and degraded her. And his soul clung to Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and he loved the girl and spoke on the girl's heart. And Shechem said to Hamor's father, "Get me this girl for a wife." And this is interesting. It implies that the guy is a seducer or a rapist whose lust gives way to love. Some sort of allowance is given for this in the later laws when it says if this guy seduces the man's daughter, he's not going to get away with leaving her as used goods, unsaleable to any future husband. He must marry her. But if he's such a skunk, the father can't give the daughter to him in good conscience. He's at least got to fork over the bride price. Well, you see, that implies that you might have a situation where, okay, Lothario, you shouldn't have done what you did, but if you, you really do care for, what the heck, let's overlook that. You're considered her husband. It's the code of the hills, I guess. So something like that's going on here, and it's an interesting ambiguity. Shechem looks bad, but not all that bad, which sets up the story for revenge that is taken a little too severely. Verse 5, and Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, and his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob kept quiet until they came. And Hamor, Shechem's father, went out to Jacob to speak with him. And Jacob's sons came from the field when they heard, and the men were pained, and they were very furious, for he had done a foolhardy thing among Israel, to lie with Jacob's daughter, and such a thing is not done. And Hamor spoke with him, saying, Shechem, my son, his soul longs for your daughter. Give her to him as a wife, and marry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters to you, and live with us. And the land will be before you. Live and go around in it, and take possession in it. And Shechem said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and I'll give whatever you say to me. Make a bride price and gift on me very great, and let me give whatever you say to me, and give me the girl as a wife. Okay, not for him, but for his son. And Jacob's sons answered Shechem and Hamor his father with deception as they spoke, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to him, we aren't able to do this thing to give our sister to a man who has a foreskin, because that's a disgrace to us. Only this way will we consent to you. If you'll be like us, every male among you to be circumcised, and we'll give our daughters to you, and take your daughters to us, and we'll live with you, and we'll become one people. And if you won't listen to us to be circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and go. No, our daughter and sister, of course. And the words were good in Hamor's eyes, and Hamor's son Shechem's eyes. I'm sorry, I got the two guys mixed up there. And the boy did not delay to do the thing, for he desired Jacob's daughter, and he was more respected than all his father's house. And Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the people of their city, saying, these people are peaceable with us, and they'll live in the land and go around in it, and the land here has enough breadth for them. Let's take their daughters for us as wives, and give our daughters to them. Only in this way will these people consent to us to live with us, to be one people. If every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised, their cattle and possessions and all their animals, won't they be ours? Only let's consent to them, and they'll live with us. And everyone who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and everyone who went out of the gate of the city was circumcised. So you see the negotiation, the sell job he's doing. He says, look, we're not in the habit of circumcision. It's not a pleasant prospect, but if you'd be willing to go along with it, just think, I'm not the only one that prospers here. If they come and join us, we'll all be one big family, and these people have considerable holdings, and they'll be ours. We'll just intermarry with them. You're not going to be on the losing end of the stick here. That's an awful pun. I didn't even have that in mind. But so they agree, and they all get circumcised. 25 are still in J. And it was on the third day when they were herding, and two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, and they came upon the city stealthily, and they killed every male. And they killed Hamor and his son Shechem by the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. Jacob's sons had come upon the corpses and despoiled the city because they had defiled their sisters. They took their sheep and their oxen and their asses and what was in the city and what was in the field. And they captured and despoiled all their wealth and all their infants and their wives and everything that was in the house. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You've caused me anguish, making me odious to those who live in the land, to the Canaanite and to the Perizzite, and I'm few in number, and they'll be gathered against me and strike me, and I'll be destroyed, I and my house." And they said, "Shall he treat our sister like a prostitute?" What a tale. Now there's a little bit of ambiguity in here. Gunkel thought, because different sources had been interwoven, though it is not easy to tell them apart systematically as it is elsewhere, it seems perhaps as if in one place all of the brothers are in tune with this and are planning to do this deed of revenge, but then it kind of seems like, no, it's only Simeon and Levi, and the others approve or don't approve. It kind of sounds like the others only see the result afterward and weren't in on the plan. Maybe they were, in one version, they were sincerely willing to go along. It does say they, the brethren, of Dinah, were speaking deceitfully, trying to trick them, but you almost get the impression later it was just Simeon and Levi and that the other brothers meant it. And they're just as surprised as the poor Shechemites were. But certainly Jacob was not too thrilled with this. He must have been willing to go along with it because he's really shocked. He's like, "What are you doing? You don't think this is going to remain hidden, do you? And everybody's going to know we dealt with them in a deceitful way, and they're going to take revenge on us. Thanks a lot, guys." Of course, that doesn't happen. His fears are unjustified. Well, you might say, wasn't Jacob told by God that he would watch over him? What's he afraid of? Well, you can understand that didn't seem to foresee events like this, right? It's kind of going a little bit beyond the pale. And it's not as if there wasn't some sort of a grudge, but to their credit, Shechem and Hamor were actually trying to make up for what they had done. And it wouldn't have been a bad deal, and Simeon and Levi were just looking for revenge no matter what the cost. There's the ancient practice of vendetta talk, and I don't really care what the result is. You guys might come back against us, but you're only up in the ante. That'll just give us more justification for killing even more of you. You remember what Lamech says in Genesis: "If Cain be avenged sevenfold, surely Lamech 77-fold." Well, Jake is kind of worried about that it will escalate to the point that he and his sons, who already are pictured as having whole tribes at their disposal. The line is kind of going back and forth between the real object and the metaphor, between the groups of Israelites and the fictive sons of Jacob. But at any rate, there is one heck of a revenge story. This is an example, by the way, perhaps, of the practice of bridegroom circumcision, implying maybe that the Israelites had circumcised themselves in puberty rites rather than as a birth ritual, as has survived in Judaism today. The story in Exodus 4, where God attacks Moses and Zipporah manages to save him by circumcising their young son Gershom and touching his foreskin to Moses' penis as a token, as if he had been circumcised, which is what God was mad about that he hadn't been. And he says, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. The only plausible reading I know of that story is that it is a ceremonial story intended to facilitate a transition among Israel from bridegroom or puberty rite circumcision to infant circumcision. Maybe that is why this is depicted as a special measure here, because the Shechemites are in effect going to become Israelites. They're going to intermarry, so it isn't put quite this way, but it certainly fits with the notion that if they're entering the covenant of Abraham, they're going to have to take the covenant seal of circumcision. But it is mighty interesting it doesn't say that. If you can imagine this actually happening, surely that's what they would have said, but you don't really want to take what is a death trap and dignify it by making it part of the Holy Covenant, so neither of the storytellers do. So Simeon is going to pay for this. His tribe is going to be dissolved later. In terms of the fragments of history we have, as Gunter Lilling points out, what may really have happened to the tribe of Simeon is that they became the same as the Ishmaelites. And fascinating article in the Journal of Higher Criticism some years ago. But anyway, let's not get caught up there. Let's go on into 35, where we have taken a couple of looks at this already, organizing it thematically, and I guess it's short enough that we ought to just repeat them, especially since I've got a different translation open here. 35:1, this is E material, and God, Elohim, said to Jacob, get up and go up to Beth-el and live there and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from Esau your brother. And Jacob said to his house and to everyone who was with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you and be purified and change your clothes. And let's get up and go up to Beth-el, and I'll make an altar there to God who answered me in a day of my trouble. And he was with me in the way that I went. And they gave all the foreign gods that were in their hand and the rings that were in their ears to Jacob, and Jacob stashed them under the oak that was by Shechem. Now, were these the household gods that Rachel had taken from Laban? It doesn't seem to imply that, because Laban's gods were apparently teraphim, little images of departed ancestors who could be invoked and so on. These are thought of as pagan deities, but that is the result of a long view in retrospect. At the time, they certainly were not considered alien deities, and there could be another reason for burying them under this oak. Who knows why they did it? It could be like the Geniza in a synagogue. Perhaps the idols had grown old and worn with people holding on to them as they prayed, and they decided to retire them, burying them under a sacred oak. And of course, that may have made the oak sacred, but notice the way it's referred to. Jacob stashed them under the oak that was by Shechem. The oak, what, there must be a bunch of oaks. Well, yeah, but this one must be one he anticipates the reader will know. You know, the sacred oak at Shechem, which is a big holy place for a long time. And they traveled, and God's terror was on the cities that were around them. They did not pursue the children of Jacob. And Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan. It is Beth-el, also called that. He and all the people who were with him, and he built an altar there and called the place El of Beth-el, house of God, God of the house of God, because God was revealed to him there when he was fleeing from his brother. Well, this seems to be really a slightly edited, alternate version of why Beth-el was important. Anyway, he just goes back at the completion of his adventure, as he had anticipated, back in, 28, when he had that dream of God there. But it seems to be just an alternate story that would be told to the pilgrims at the great shrine at Bethel. And then verse 8, and Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried beneath Bethel, beneath an oak again, and he called its name Oak of Weeping, or Alon Bachuth. So it is one of many sacred oaks. You can imagine in these sacred groves, such as Isaiah and others will later denounce as pits of syncretistic idolatry. Here, no, this is the PR for the place. This is why you ought to come to Bethel. You see, there are all these shrines and sacred groves, all for different reasons. And if you want to go to the Oak of Weeping, that is, mourning for the one of the mothers of Israel buried there, her spirit can be summoned up to give you a blessing, to give your daughter fertility, things like that. That's why this note is there. He picked it up in his researches, and why is this place sacred? Oh, don't you know? This is why. So again, ceremonial story as well as a etymological story, because Oak of Weeping, that could be for various reasons, but somebody said weeping, mourning, somebody must have been buried there, well, maybe it was she. Well, now we have P's version of the name change. I've defined him here. He's not been with us much lately, but in verse 9, P has, and Elohim, or God, appeared to Jacob, and then the Pentateuchal redactor has added, again, when he was coming from Paddan Aram, peeing in, and he blessed him, and God said to him, your name is Jacob. Your name will not be called Jacob anymore, but rather Israel will be your name. Wait a minute, didn't he know that? Well, he did according to E, but not according to P. And we got both of them stitched together. And verse 11, God said to him, I am El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a community of nations will be from you, and kings will come out from your hips, your loins. And the land that I gave to Abraham and to Isaac, I'll give it to you, and I'll give the land to your seed after you. And God went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a stone pillar, and he poured a libation on it and spilled oil on it. That's anointing, right? Just like the anointed king is the Messiah. And Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken to him there, Bethel. Wait a minute! Haven't we heard this place named Bethel and El Bethel and all these variations several times? Well, yeah, but this is P's version. Right? We have all this repetition because they didn't want to cut out anything if they could help it. We're going to see in the Joseph story how some stuff is cut out because the story is so darn long and it's already repetitive for the doublets they left in it. They couldn't just leave everything, or you'd have like everything happening to him twice, and it would be intolerably long. But notice the signature marks of P, the use of the name El Shaddai, the commandment, be fruitful and multiply, etc. All right, the Genesis redactor adds a transitional note in verse 16a, and they traveled from Bethel. Then we pick back up with E. And there was still the span of the land to come to Ephrath. And Rachel gave birth, and she had difficulty in her labor. And it was when she was having difficulty in her labor, the midwife said to her, don't be afraid, because this too is a son for you. And it was as her soul was going out, because she died, and she called his name Ben-Oni. And his father called him Benjamin. And Rachel died, and she was buried on the road to Ephrath. It is Bethlehem. That is today, right? That's what we call it now. And Jacob set up a pillar on her grave. It is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. And again, guess why? How does he even know this? Well, because he went there, going over the countryside, stopping at the shrines, asking the attendant priests, Father, what is the story here? Why is this holy? And well, here's the tale. He thought, oh, I see. So that's what happened to Rachel and so forth. All right. The name Benjamin actually is a geographical designation. It means the son of I believe the right hand, indicating the south. Same word as the country Yemen, which is on the south of the Arabian Peninsula. So here's the 12th son of Jacob, the last of the tribes. Quick note from Jay, and Israel traveled and pitched his tent past Migdal Eder. And it was when Israel was tenting in that land, and Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard. Oh, he shouldn't have done that. It's not his own mother, but it's what 1 Corinthians mentions. Nudity, not even accepted among the pagans, that a man should live with his father's wife. Not his own mother, but a stepmother, etc. Shouldn't have done this. And there will be repercussions. Okay, now we're back to P, because we need some genealogical material. And Jacob's sons were 12. The sons of Leah were Jacob's firstborn, Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. And the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, were Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, were Gad and Asher. These were Jacob's sons who were born to him in Paddan Aram. Though just before we were told that Benjamin was born in Bethlehem. But what the heck, two different sources. You notice the firstborn is Reuben. Why did we just hear that he slept with his father's concubine, one of the other mothers? Well, to indicate why we are not going to see Reuben take his natural place of authority as the firstborn. He cheated himself out of that by this act, so his place is going to be taken, depending on what source you read, by Judah or by Joseph. Judah, the leader of the southern tribes, Joseph, father of Ephraim and Manasseh, father of the leader of the northern tribes. Okay. 27, still P. And Jacob came to Isaac, his father, in Mamre at Kiriath Arba, it is called Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had resided. And Isaac's days were 180 years. And Isaac expired, and he died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. And Esau and Jacob, his sons, buried him. Why wouldn't he think he was old and full of days when he had lived just a fraction as long as these antediluvian patriarchs, Methuselah and Arphaxad and so on? Well, of course, this story doesn't really presuppose that stuff. This is a story told in its own right, whereas the lifespans were kind of a scholarly, scribal invention as these guys were sitting around doing crosswords. It isn't really story material. There's no story about any of the pre-flood patriarchs that hinges upon their great age. Nobody even remarks on it. That's all just a function of somebody having fun tabulating stuff. It isn't really a narrative item. And you can tell that because the narrators regard these much shorter lifespans as full of days, etc. Well, let's just risk putting ourselves into a coma by reading the rest of this P material. There's a little bit interesting in it. We have the rest of, we have most of 36, chapter 36, tied on by the Genesis redactor with verse 1. And these are the records of Esau. He is Edom, of the nation of Edom. You might think it means he was also named Edom. I don't think that's what they mean, because Edom is Adam, if you're talking about an individual. The alternate Edomite first man myth that somehow supplanted in the Bible the Israelite indigenous first man myth, that of Enosh, which resurfaces later among the Mandeans, where he's a heavenly being, Enosh Uthras. 36:2, back to P. Esau had taken his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Adah, daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and a holy, boy, if I can say this, I deserve to go to heaven. Aholibama, whatever, daughter of, name the kid that, no, I'll learn to pronounce it, daughter of Anna, daughter of Zibeon, the Hivite, and Basemath, daughter of Ishmael, sister of Nebaioth. And Adah gave birth for Esau to Eliphaz. Eliphaz? Could that be the same guy as in the book of Job? Who knows? And Basemath gave birth to Reuel. Name sound familiar to you? That's one of Tolkien's middle names, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. And Aholibama gave birth to Jeush and Jalam and Korah. It would sound like the Masons. These are Esau's sons, who were born to him in the land of Canaan. And Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the persons of his household and his cattle and all of his animals and all of his possessions that he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and he went to a land from the presence of Jacob his brother, because the property was too great for them to live together, and the land of their residences was not able to suffice them because of their cattle. And Esau lived in Mount Seir. Esau, he is Edom. It was like similar geological pair, Abraham and Lot, both so prosperous they get in each other's way and have to move. Verse 9, these are the records of, I think that's generations, of Esau, the father of Edom, in Mount Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, son of Adah, Esau's wife; Reuel, son of Basemath, Esau's wife; and Eliphaz's sons were Teman. Eliphaz the Temanite, remember him from Job? Omar, Zepho, one of the Marx brothers, could be the same name, not kidding. And Gatam and Kenaz. And Timnah had been a concubine of Eliphaz, son of Esau, and she gave birth to Amalek for Eliphaz. These are the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. And these are the sons of Reuel, Nahath and Zerah, Shammah and Mizah. These are the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. And these are the sons of Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, daughter of Zibeon, Esau's wife. And she gave birth for Esau to Jeush and Jalam and Korah. Didn't we just hear all this? Well, it could be that some other non-P genealogy has been grafted in here just so as not to lose it. These are the chiefs of the children of Esau. The sons of Eliphaz, Esau's firstborn: Chief Tema, Chief Omar, Chief Zepho, Chief Kenaz, Chief Korah, Chief Gatam, Chief Amalek. These are the chiefs of Eliphaz in the land of Edom. These are the sons of Adah. These are the sons of Reuel, son of Esau: Chief Nahath, Chief Zerah, Chief Shammah, Chief Mizah. These are the chiefs of Reuel in the land of Edom. These are the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. And these are the sons of Aholibamah, Esau's wife: Chief Jeush, Chief Jalam, Chief Korah. These are the chiefs of Aholibamah, daughter of Anna, Esau's wife. These are the sons of Esau, and these are their chiefs. That is Edom, another tribal league. Let's just count up those chiefs. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Not bad. These are the some. Now, of course, that means that these groups were originally independent and came together and decided that there was a guy named Esau, originally Edom, as their progenitor. These are the sons of Seir, the Horite, who lived in the land: Lotan and Shobal and Zibeon and Anah and Dishon and Atzer and Dishon. These are the chiefs of the Horites, the children of Seir in the land of Edom. And the children of Lotan are Hori and Hemon, and Lotan's sister is Timnah. I tell you, that's interesting. Lotan is the Canaanite version of Leviathan, the serpent god, who I believe was worshipped as the father of El Elyon, involving the same myth pattern as the Babylonian pantheon, where you have Kingu and Apsu and Tiamat, the first generation of divine beings who are dragons. Second generation, the leader of whom is El Elyon, and Ea and all the others are afraid of these dragons, and so the third generation gains sovereignty by dispensing with the first generation. In the Bible, Yahweh defeats Rahab and Leviathan and Nehushtan and becomes co-regent or succeeds El Elyon, just as Marduk does in Babylon. Okay, and why would a person be named Lotan? Well, named after the god he worshipped or they worshipped. That's pretty common. Lotan's sister is Timnah. Could that have anything to do with Tiamat? I wouldn't be surprised. And these are the children of Shobal, Alvan, and Manahath, and Ebal, Shepho, and Onam. And these are the children of Zibeon, Ajah, and Anah. That is Anah who found the water in the wilderness when he tended the asses of Zibeon, his father. Notice they figure you'll know that. They'll say, oh yeah, that Anah. I got A-N-A-H. Yeah, right, that's the one. So that's where he plugs in. That's all we know. And these are the children of Anah, Dishon and Aholibamah, daughter of Anah. And these are the children of Dishon, Hemdan and Eshban and Ithran and Cheran. These are the children of Atzer, Bilhan and Zavan and Achan. These are the children of Dishon, Uz, that's where Job was from, and Aaron. These are the chiefs of the Horites: Chief Lotan, there he is again, Chief Shobal, Chief Zibeon, Chief Anah, Chief Dishon, Chief Atzer, Chief Dishon. These are the chiefs of the Horites by their chiefdoms in the land of Seir. Well, all of that presupposes long history after Moses. Certainly there was no thought that Moses wrote this stuff. I mean, you can fairly say, yes, the Bible, Genesis, is claiming to have been written long after Moses. That is a fair way of putting what we just read here. Thank God that's pretty much the end of P for the moment. We go back to J in 31. But I have to tell you, it's not that much more interesting. It's parallel material from another source. And these are the kings who ruled in the land of Edom before a king ruled the children of Israel. And Bela, son of Beor, ruled in Edom, and the name of his city was Dinhaba. And Bela died, and Jobab, son of Zerah from Basra, ruled in his place. And Jobab died, and Husham of the land of Timani ruled in his place. And Husham died, and Hadad, the son of Bedad, who struck Midian in the field of Moab, ruled in his place. See, there's another story they figure you'll know. Just a little thumbnail sketch. Oh, yeah, him. I know you're talking about now. And Hadad, named for the storm god of Syria, who was a twin of Yahweh, Baal Hadad. Well, the name of the city was Avith, verse 36 of chapter 36. And Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah ruled in his place. And Samlah died, and Saul of Rehoboth on the river ruled in his place. And Saul died, and Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, ruled in his place. And Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, died, and Hadar ruled in his place. And the name of his city was Pau, P-A-W. And his wife's name was Mehetabel, daughter of Matred, daughter of Mezahab. Yeah, you've heard that name before, Mehetabel. And you thought, who on earth would be named that? Well, anybody named for this Edomite woman. And these are the names of the chiefs of Esau by their families, by their places, by their names. Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, Chief Japheth, believe it or not, Chief, this would be a great TV series. You could have these guys cooking against each other. You call it Iron Chief, Chief Mibzar, Chief Magdiel, Chief Iram. These are the chiefs of Edom by their homes in the land of their possession. That is Esau, father of Edom. Yes, folks, you can just imagine what people feel they must allegorically squeeze from these verses in the interest of vindicating the doctrine that all Scripture is given to us for edification. Anyway, we begin the story of Joseph in 37, but I would like to give that a miss for the moment and go into the only other non-Joseph story in Genesis, which is in the very next chapter. Now, I'm not quite sure why this occurs here, but so I'm kind of undoing it by bringing this back before Joseph begins. We need to take a fast look then at chapter 38. A great chapter, grossly misunderstood and taken out of context. I'm sure you'll find it fascinating. This is the one place, according to some folks who are wrong, that the Bible mentions masturbation. Of course, it doesn't actually mention it. And this is the place it doesn't mention it, so to speak. This is J material. J seems to get all the good stuff. 38:1. And it was at that time, and Judah went down from his brothers, and because the time when they're all grown up, right? And turned to an Adullamite man, and his name was Hira. And Judah saw a daughter of a Canaanite man there, and his name was Shua. And he took her and came to her. That was one of the names of the Hebrew midwives in Exodus. He took her and came to her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And he called his name Is that the same from Plato's myth of I doubt it. And she became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, and she called his name Onan. And she proceeded again to give birth to a son, and she called his name Shelah. And he was at Chesed when she gave birth to him. I don't know why he figures we need to know that, but I imagine there is some kind of wink to the reader there, but it sure goes over my head. Verse 6, and Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was bad in Yahweh's eyes, and Yahweh killed him. And Judah said to Onan, come to your brother's wife, and couple as a brother-in-law with her, and raise seed for your brother. And Onan knew that the seed would not be his. And it was when he came to his brother's wife, and he spent on the ground, so, or as it says in King James, he spilled his seed upon the ground, so as not to give seed for his brother. And what he did was bad in Yahweh's eyes, and he killed him too. Now, what did he do here that is wrong? Well, you just heard it pretty graphically, right? Coitus interruptus. Is that it, or is it masturbation? The folks that think this has to do with masturbation must picture Onan is masturbating at first before he goes in. Says, Tamar, I'm sorry, I'm not getting anywhere. Maybe tomorrow night, and then he'd do the same thing. No, I don't think that's it. But it doesn't matter, right? Whether he's been having sex with her, but at the point of climax withdraws so that she doesn't receive the sperm. Doesn't matter. The point is that he's disobeying the custom of levirate, as we later call it in Latin, brother marriage. The custom, which is also big in the book of Ruth, is pivotal to the plot in that story. The custom was that for the sake of inheritance, if a guy dies without having had any sons, that is, any heirs, if he has a male, ideally a brother, but a cousin, whatever there is, he ought to come in, he ought to step forward and impregnate the widow, and the hopefully, they figured, sons that would come about would be considered the heirs of the dead man, being the sons of his mother, and as close as you could get to him, genetically, we would say, his father, or, was close, his father's brother, his father's cousin, whatever. And this guy won't do it. And you notice it says, because the heirs, the seed would not be his. You can kind of picture the same qualm coming about with someone today when we have sperm donors and so on. The woman doesn't want to get married, but she wants to have a kid, so she picks out somebody she admires and says, look, I'm not asking you to raise the kid, I'll do that, but I do need the sperm, what about it? And you can well imagine sometimes these guys say, well, I appreciate that, but this is going to be a little me running around. I have some obligation here. I can't just pretend I gave you a Christmas present. The seed would not be his. Or worse yet, if like in Woody Allen's Hannah and her sisters, the guy has so low a sperm count, though his wife's okay, that they ask their friend to impregnate Woody Allen's wife, and he does, and the kid looks just like his friend and colleague, not at all like him. Well, it isn't his seed, and it's pretty darn obvious. And I don't want to go along with that. But he should have, right? Because Yahweh is so concerned about levirate marriage, and that is the point of the thing, that he offs the poor jerk. Now, we don't know what did, right? That's unrelated, but the point is we need to have him good and dead so we can have Onan step up to the plate and then refuse to play. It's really all about him. Now, men, don't let this happen to you. So it has nothing to do with masturbation, a practice they surely knew about but did not say anything about. It has nothing to do with coitus interruptus. It has to do with levirate marriage. That is certainly the point. Okay, that's not the end of the story, though. And Judah, verse 11, Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, live as a widow at your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. This is apparently a young kid. Because, he said, or else he too will die like his brothers. And Tamar went and lived at her father's house. And the days were many, and Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. And Judah was consoled, and he went up to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite, to Timnah. We'll see what he means there. But you see what's happening here. He doesn't realize why these guys are croaking. He's afraid that there's something about Tamar. What, is she poisoning these guys? My sons? What is this? Is she like Bluebeard or something? In fact, what he's afraid of, it sounds just like in the book of Tobit, whereas the woman, what's her name, is beset by a demon, I believe Asmodeus, and whoever she marries, they die on the wedding night. And so after a while, it's a little tough for her to get any dates. And finally, the angel Raphael finds a way to get Tobias to exorcise the demon, and Tobias and this woman live happily ever after. But he's afraid of something like this. Or think again of the story of the hypothetical case the Sadducees bring up to Jesus in Mark. It was, Rabbi, suppose there's this woman, and she's married to a guy, and he dies, and they follow levirate marriage, and so she marries his brother, but he dies, and it turns out there's 7 brothers, and sooner or later all of them manage to inherit her, and they all die, and so does the woman in this resurrection you claim is going to happen. What, she's going to be married to all of them? Well, that's the same idea. Why would all these guys die one after the other? Well, Tobit is the only one who gives us the answer. Demon haunting. But that seems to be what Judah is afraid of. It's her fault. I don't want to lose another kid. So let me try to temporize. Let me just keep her hanging here. Why don't you go back and live with your father until little Shelah is old enough to beget a child to be considered Er's heir. So he's going up. Now, Judah's wife's dead, and he's gotten over it, and they're going up to check out his shepherds and shearers and all that. 13, and it was told to Tamar, saying, "Here, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." And she took off her widowhood clothes from on her, and covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in a visible place that was on the road to Timnah, because she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. And so, this woman's not going to be denied. 15, and Judah saw her and thought her to be a prostitute because she had covered her face, and called him a big boy. And he turned to her by the road, and she said, and he said, "Come on, let me come to you," because he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What will you give me when you come to me?" He said, "I'll have a goat kid sent from the flock." And she said, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." And he said, "What is the pledge that I'll give you?" And she said, "Your seal, and your cord, and your staff that's in your hand." The seal is a signet ring, the design that be pressed into a clay to indicate that any document sealed that way really came from him. Right? Your seal and your cord and your staff that's in your hand. And he gave them to her, and he came to her, and she became pregnant by him. And she got up and went and took off her veil from on her and put on her widowhood clothes. And Judah sent the goat kid by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, and he did not find her. And he asked the people of her place, saying, "Where is the sacred prostitute? She was visibly by the road." And they said, "There's no sacred prostitute here." Sacred prostitute? What is that? Well, yeah, they had. She would have been. Tamar's masquerading as a Kadesh, a holy one. The idea was that if you were a worshiper of Baal and Astarte, Baal was the sky god, the rain was his semen, and he would impregnate or fertilize Mother Earth, and then the crops would be their children. And if you were having a drought, or your crop yield was not good, you would go and give a gift to the local priestitude, as I like to call them, or sacred prostitutes, and you would have sex with her, and the two of you would be reenacting the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage of heaven and earth, of the sky god and the earth mother, Baal and Astarte, and supposedly the god would fertilize your crops. So that's why there were these priestitutes, as I like to call them. If I ever did my own paraphrased version of the Old Testament, I would be sorely tempted to call this gal a priestitute. We'll have to wait and see if I ever do, though. 22, and he came back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her, and also the people of the place said there was no sacred prostitute here." And Judah said, "Let her take them, or else we'll be a disgrace. Here, I've sent this goat kid, and you didn't find her." So he resigns himself to losing his symbols of authority. I guess he figures if they try to chase her down, it would be so embarrassing, he'd rather not have the whole thing known. 24, and it was about 3 months, and was told to Judah, saying, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has whored, and here she's pregnant by whoring as well." Of course, they don't have any idea who this woman was that Judah slept with. And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." So she was brought out. And now, what was the problem there? I mean, he didn't seem to find it morally problematical that there were prostitutes active. He even patronizes this woman whom he does not know to be Tamar, right? That's not a problem. It was legal to be a prostitute and to patronize prostitutes in the Old Testament. The thing was, women who were wives must not try to make a few extra bucks for the cookie jar by turning tricks. As in the book of Proverbs. And the problem there is that's considered adultery. It's not simply because it's prostitution. Now, the same curse falls on Tamar here, technically, though it's not absolutely bad because her husband is dead. But still, she ought to be faithful to him. That was a moral theme that gets kicked around all over the Mediterranean among the Romans and others. Should a widow be faithful to her husband and not ever marry again? Some said, well, yeah, she should be. It's no different than committing adultery with some guy while her husband's alive. So, maybe that's what's going on here. So he figures, well, she needs to be executed. She's become a whore. And doesn't matter that she's a sacred whore, right? No, and nor is that even said. It's just said that, well, she's gotten pregnant by somebody that she has no business sleeping with. Verse 25, she was brought out, and she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "I'm pregnant by the man to whom these belong." And she said, "Recognize, to whom do these seal and cords and staff belong?" And Judah recognized and said, she's more right than I am because of the fact that I didn't give her to my son Shelah, and he did not go on to know her again. Why the heck would he? Well, conceivably he could have to replace the sons that didn't do levirate service, but that'd be a bit much. 27, and it was at the time that she was giving birth, and here were twins in her womb. And it was as she was giving birth, and one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." And of course I need to know that for inheritance purposes, right? He was considered the firstborn. And it was as he pulled his hand back, and here his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach you've made for yourself." And he called his name Perez, which means divider. And his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, came out after. And he was called Zerah, which I think means follower on. Well, Perez is a pretty well-known name today. Shimon Peres in Israel, and George Perez, the great comic book artist. All right, so levirate marriage is the big thing. It's also thought by some that you could tie this in with the business of the teraphim. Remember when Rachel steals the household gods of her father, Uncle Laban. And they were your departed ancestors, with whom, however, you could remain in contact via the tokens of their presence as statues there. That their souls or their shades or something were down, as Job tells us, under the earth, riding the waves of the subterranean ocean, the Tahom, equivalent somehow to Sheol. You remember, according to the Genesis 1 creation account, the priestly account, the earth is riding on, the flat earth, on the breast of a vast, infinite ocean depth, the Tahom. Well, that's where the souls went, the shades, very similar to the netherworld of both Babylon and Greece. And so you could contact them. Well, they weren't going to be able to do you much good, though, in terms of having heirs, but they wanted you to have heirs to continue to venerate them. Because if it's like other ancestor veneration cultures, you would offer food, like a kid leaving it for Santa Claus, at the tomb of the dear departed, and they needed it, and would starve to death even in the next world somehow if you weren't providing for them. And so it was in their interest that you have children to keep up the veneration of your ancestors. So that and property inheritance made it very important to have that a man have descendants, even merely nominal and legal ones, if it came to that. Once you have an idea of a real immortality or a resurrection, you don't need that anymore, and so you don't even have it anymore, not surprisingly, later in the Bible. But here's one of the many places where, as everyone, whether a critic or a fundamentalist reader, will agree that you have to know something about the assumptions of the ancient culture to make any sense of the narrative. This is one place where you cannot fault fundamentalists. They are zealous to read commentaries and things where people can tell them these things, these background assumptions of the Bible's cultures. And they know good and well that there are a lot of things that are just not mentioned because the original reader was assumed to know all about them. So I've got to hand it to them there. I think they're really, occasionally you run across fundamentalists who say, I don't need any book but the Bible, I don't need to look at commentaries, I can just read it with the help of the Holy Ghost. But in my experience, if you just explain a little bit of a story like this to them, they're very open to that. They're happy to understand part of the Bible they never understood before. I mean, they know they got to translate the darn thing, right? They know that you need some ancient knowledge to make sense of the text. And that is, I believe, the great chink in the armor of stubborn fundamentalists, if you can say, you see how simply some knowledge of the ancient culture makes sense of it? Yeah. Well, if we can make sense of it by showing that different sources have been put together, and you can say, that would make sense, isn't that the better way to go? And after a while, with a few of those explanations, you begin to realize that this inerrancy thing is just a way to stop you from understanding the Bible. And of course, very many of us see that when we go to seminary or when we study the Bible on our own. We realize, gee, this is strange. Precisely for the sake of appreciating the depths of the Bible, I got to get rid of my fundamentalism. It's either be a devout fundie or plumb the depths of Scripture, ironically. But that's sometimes the way it goes. Well, we're just about to get into the Joseph story. I want to, however, take a brief digression, which isn't really a digression, to tell you about the story of Osiris. There were various versions of this, but since I believe the story of Joseph in Egypt is a version of it, I think it will help us to understand it, to know what to look for. Now, would the Bible writers have known of an Egyptian story? You know they would have known it. Whether you want to take a fundamentalist or a minimalist or a Foxwell Albright type of view, a John Bright kind of view of things, on any reckoning, you know darn well that Israel knew about Egyptian stories and rituals, because there are too many connections. Very ancient ones, if you believe in the Exodus. Even if you don't, you probably know that Egypt ruled Palestine for a while in the 3rd millennium BCE. You know there are plenty of Egyptian names, if not least Moses and Gershom among Israelites. You know that as late as Alexander, you had Jews in Alexandria, Egypt. The Bible was translated into Greek at the behest of people from the Ptolemaic Hellenistic Egyptian Empire. There's just all kinds of connections. You remember after the fall of Babylon in 586, Jeremiah goes to Egypt with a bunch of refugees. You know that there are Egyptian Yahweh temples at Leontopolis and Elephantopolis and so on, indicating that Jews and Judaism were all over the place. And that means they certainly knew about the gods and stories of these other countries, and it's also pretty clear they often shared them. They were no strangers to these things, and if they weren't, then why are Hosea and Isaiah and Jeremiah always beating the drum to renounce Baal, etc.? I think Hosea even says that the people address God in prayer as my Lord, my Baal, and so forth. So they, very similar deities, and they must have thought that there were just different names of the same ones. Well, they certainly could have known about the myths of Osiris. They must have known it. I mean, I'm sure there's ignorance just like there is today, but it's just... And this goes all the way into the Hellenistic period, where the religion of Isis and Osiris was internationally known. And one of the leading Hellenistic religions in the Roman Empire. Okay, so it's not like you're asking, could they have known about Krishna? Though they could have known that too, actually. All right, so what's the story of Osiris? Well, he appears to have been the god of fertility, specifically of grain. It had to do with the myth of his passion, death, and resurrection had to do with the flooding of the Nile, the beating back of the desert, and its parching effect, because he has two important relations. One is his twin sister and divine consort, Isis, who invented writing and marriage and all kinds of things, the queen of heaven. The other important one is his brother, Set. And who's he? Well, he is the god of the desert. And you can see right off the bat that these two guys are going to be opponents. The one embodying fertility, the other the sterility of the desert. And indeed, you're right. Well, according to the myth, Osiris is also the divine king, and his wife, the Isis, the divine queen, and her sister Nephthys, a divine concubine, at least a second wife. Well, one day, jealous Set, also called Typhon in some versions, decides to assassinate his brother, and having a big feast, and so Set prepares this sarcophagus. It's ornate and made of beautiful materials, and people would they're dying to get in, so to speak. They love this, and you got to remember the mortuary cult of Egypt, right? The way the pharaohs were buried elaborately with all the goodies, the spirit doubles of which they would use in the next life, etc. So being buried in an ornate sarcophagus, oh man, that was the way to go. So he has this thing measured so that it will fit Osiris's dimensions exactly. And he has some crony in the middle of the party say, hey, take a look at this. Somebody left this perfectly good sarcophagus out here. And they bring it in. Everybody's oohing and ahhing as if it's the latest Cadillac or something. And Seth says, let's make it a door prize. Each one of us, like Cinderella with the slipper, everybody here lie down in it, and whoever it fits best can keep it. And so people are pretty eager to do this, and they do lie down in it one by one. And when Osiris lies down in it, well, not only does it fit perfectly, but here come a bunch of Set's henchmen to nail him into the thing. So slam, down goes the lid, and they fasten it shut and run out of there with it. They let it drift on the Nile, which is a real common mythic motif, right? Moses and Sargon, as infants, were let to, also Romulus and Remus, to drift on the Nile. Well, they let it go, and Isis finds out about this. She doesn't know what happened once the coffin left, but she pieces this together. And so, as Set is taken over, she decides to follow the course of the river to locate the body of her husband, her lord. In some sources, she even says, "They have taken away the body of my lord, and I know not where they have laid him." So she goes, and various adventures ensue, and after a long time, she finds that the coffin has somehow it's come to rest somewhere, and a big tree has enveloped it and grown up around it and become part of a pillar holding up a house. Well, she gets the people that own the place to agree to let her chop it down and get him out of there. But no sooner does she do so than Set somehow makes an appearance again and chops the body, still dead, of Osiris into a bunch of fragments and sends them all over Egypt. This is kind of similar to something that happens twice in the Bible, where Saul and before him the Benjaminite in Judges chapter 19 saw up a corpse into pieces and FedEx it all over Israel to summon everybody. Well, Set saws the body of Osiris apart, scatters the fragments. Isis and Nephthys determine they will once again go find him, and they do, and they assemble all the pieces, and in some tellings of the story, there is one piece missing, his phallus, or penis, and she makes another one, an artificial one out of wax, but she anoints the body, and he rises from the dead, and impregnates her physically, and then goes off to rule the netherworld. He becomes the judge of the living and the dead. All men must appear before Osiris when they die. Some people would say, well, this is not much of a parallel to Jesus, though I think you can see the parallels, because he doesn't go to heaven, but of course he does. Heaven is just down there, and so far as this land of salvation, the paradise of the saved, it's just under the earth, not over it, where the gods live. So that really is a superficial difference. And as for the impregnating Isis, Osiris rises a second time that way, because the adult Osiris goes to Amente, the netherworld, the afterlife, to become judge, and he is reborn on earth, reincarnated in the form of his son Horus, or Harpocrates in some versions. He becomes the sun falcon and seeks out Set when he grows up and becomes a mighty warrior and defeats him in battle as revenge for his father's murder. There are all kinds of statues that we still have from ancient Egypt that show the Divine Mother cradling her divine child. Sure looks like it's Mary and Jesus, but in fact it is not. It is Isis and baby Horus, born on the 25th of December. Now there are various versions of this, but they all stick pretty close together, and this is an argument that many of us have with apologists. We say that it sure looks like this is so much like the story of Jesus that it may be the origin of it. either that or the story of Tammuz, which is equally old but known up in Babylon, or that of Attis from Phrygia, or any or all of them, since they all kind of ricocheted around in the Hellenistic age. Or Adonis, again, another one. Hercules, and other dying and rising gods. But it seems to me the parallels are very extensive. Some try to dismiss them by saying, yes, but the differences are greater than the similarities. Such an argument ignores the nature of an ideal type, where, admittedly, all religious stories differ, but when you find a notable string of similarities between them, you learn to group the similarities and bracket the differences and say, geez, it looks like all these different stories are variations on a theme, and that they may all be versions of an original story that have varied in the telling. Indeed, I think that is certainly the case. It's just like a miracle story. In the Gospels, they all follow a single outline, though you can fill in the blanks as to what the sickness or the plight of the sufferer is, what he says to the Savior, what the Savior says to either build up or challenge faith, the gesture wrought by the Savior, the occurrence of the miracle, the evidence of the miracle, the acclamation of the crowd, etc., etc. You can look at almost any miracle story in the Gospels and find them told that way. Well, it's the same thing here. There is a dying and rising God plot or paradigm or ideal type that is attested to be very, very old, and Osiris is one of the oldies, and it is not without interest that not only is there a scene in which the holy women go to find the missing body of the Savior, just as in the Gospels, but there is an anointing, recalling that in Bethany, where Jesus is anointed before his suffering, and when others protest, he says, "She has kept it for the day of my burial." I think that is a survival of the anointing of the corpse of Osiris by Isis, which raised him from the dead. And then that means that if Jesus was a kind of a mutation on the old story of Osiris, that the Christ would have nothing to do with a different case of anointing, that of a Jewish warrior king, but would simply mean the resurrected one, the same one that Osiris was, anointed with oil to raise him from the dead. Now that's Jesus. But what I want to get to is Joseph already as the Hebrew Osiris. He is an earlier adaptation of the same set of stories. And just I'm scarcely the first one to have seen this. And just to give you a few hints, we'll take a look at the story in detail next time. We have the murder of Joseph, or attempt to, by his brothers, more than one this time. We have the interest in him of a divine consort who is going to turn out to be the daughter of the priest of On. We have his connection with On, which is another version of Osiris. He becomes a priest of On when he marries into that household. We have in the element of the lie of Joseph's brethren that he was torn apart by wild animals. Another version of Set ripping up the corpse of Osiris and scattering it. In the imprisonment of Joseph, we have a match for the imprisonment of Osiris in the netherworld, at least temporarily, before his resurrection. And in the late exaltation and favoring of Benjamin as regarded as the substitute for the lost favorite son Joseph, we certainly have Horus doubling for his father Osiris. The note of vengeance is not there because the Bible writer rides above it. It turns out to be a kind of a reason to forgive, as you know, and so there are other parallels to those are some of the biggies. But I think we will find that Joseph is already the Hebrew Osiris. People used to argue that the idea of Joseph taking the throne next to Pharaoh was a kind of a symbolic recollection of the fact that the Semitic Hyksos tribe took over Egypt. I think that's really fanciful. It's really grabbing at straws to make the story look historical in some way. Certainly wasn't any more than Osiris was. Though Plutarch tried to